Have you ever noticed how almost everyone measures their progress only in the mirror and quietly becomes frustrated in the process? The crucial question is not, how much weight have I lost? And not, are my pants looser? The real question is, what does your body decide to burn first when you enter a calorie deficit? Because your body does not think aesthetically, it thinks biologically. It is not trying to sculpt a six-pack. It is trying to fuel the brain, keep the heart beating, keep the organs alive. And this is exactly where the misunderstanding begins. Many people lose weight within a few days and still see that pressure in their abdomen. Others suddenly feel lighter and believe they have burned an entire pound of fat. But what is really happening on the inside? What happens to visceral fat, the fat that sits deep in the abdominal cavity, right next to the liver, intestines, and pancreas, when you consume less energy than your body uses for 7 days? Is it just water? Or does the body actually begin to break down this metabolically active fat? Science provides a surprisingly clear answer, and it has less to do with the mirror than you might think. In the next few minutes, we will take a precise journey through those 7 days, from the first 24 hours, through hormonal shifts, to the signals your body sends long before the scale proves anything. Because progress often begins invisibly, but never randomly.
There are two very different types of belly fat in the human body. The first is visible. It lies directly under the skin. You can grab it, squeeze it, measure it. It changes your silhouette in the mirror. But the second remains hidden. Visceral fat lies deeper, inside the abdominal cavity. It surrounds the organs like a quiet roommate, the liver, intestines, pancreas. You cannot feel it, you cannot see it directly, but you can feel its effects. While subcutaneous fat mainly serves as an energy store, visceral fat behaves in a more metabolically active way. It produces signaling molecules. It influences inflammatory processes. It is closely linked to insulin resistance, elevated triglycerides, and blood sugar fluctuations. Large observational studies have repeatedly shown that a high amount of visceral fat correlates more strongly with metabolic disease than visible fat under the skin. Why? Because its location matters. Visceral fat lies in close proximity to the portal vein, the vessel that transports blood directly to the liver. Released fatty acids therefore reach the body's central metabolic organ quickly. The liver, the biochemical control center. That is exactly why visceral fat often responds more sensitively to changes in energy balance. And this is where it gets interesting. When a calorie deficit occurs, the body does not make an aesthetic decision. It prioritizes energy sources based on accessibility and hormonal context. Visceral fat is, figuratively speaking, not a deeply buried emergency reserve. It is more like a storage depot with fast access. But before the body seriously taps into this reserve, something else happens, something almost everyone mistakenly interprets as fat loss. In the first 24 hours of a calorie deficit, fat burning is not the main focus. Organization is. The body first turns to what is most readily available, glycogen. Glycogen is stored glucose. It is found mainly in the liver and muscles, and it has a special property. For every gram of stored glycogen, several grams of water are bound. When energy intake drops, especially with reduced carbohydrate intake, these stores begin to shrink, and with them, water disappears. The result? The scale often drops quickly. The abdomen feels less tight. Clothes fit more loosely. Many interpret this moment as dramatic fat loss, but physiologically, primarily water has been mobilized. That does not mean nothing is happening. On the contrary, this phase marks the beginning of a metabolic signal. Energy has become scarcer. Insulin levels fall. Glucose intake decreases. The body begins to switch more flexibly between fuel sources. In research, this transition is often referred to as the metabolic switch, a term popularized in part by neuroscientist Mark Mattson. He describes it as the moment when the body increasingly shifts from glucose burning to fat burning. But this process does not explosively. It is gradual, and this is exactly where, quietly, the story of visceral fat begins.
After about 24 hours, the internal landscape begins to change noticeably. Glycogen stores are significantly reduced. Insulin remains lower for longer. Glucose is no longer abundant, and the body faces a decision. It cannot live indefinitely off reserves that barely exist, so it activates an older mechanism, a mechanism deeply rooted in evolution, lipolysis, the breakdown of fat cells to release fatty acids. From an evolutionary perspective, this moment was essential for survival. Our ancestors did not have constant meals. Periods without food were normal. Metabolism had to be flexible, not panicked. That exact flexibility now becomes visible. When insulin remains lower for longer, the activity of hormone-sensitive lipase increases, an enzyme that mobilizes stored fat. Fatty acids enter the bloodstream. The liver begins producing more ketone bodies. Studies on metabolic adaptation show that within just a few days of a moderate calorie deficit, fat burning measurably increases, especially in individuals who previously lived in the chronic calorie surplus. And this is where visceral fat becomes relevant. Visceral fat tissue has more receptors for stress and metabolic hormones than subcutaneous fat. It is more highly vascularized. It responds more sensitively to hormonal changes. That is why weight loss intervention studies often show a recurring pattern. At the beginning of a structure deficit, visceral fat decreases proportionally more than subcutaneous fat. Not dramatic, not spectacular, but measurable. Magnetic resonance imaging studies demonstrate that early weight loss is often accompanied by a significant reduction in intra-abdominal fat mass, even before visible external changes appear. Why? Because visceral fat is metabolically active. It is mobilized more quickly when the hormonal environment is favorable. But this process depends on one crucial factor: consistency. In these first days, something psychological often happens. The scale drops, the abdomen looks flatter, motivation rises, and this is exactly where danger begins. Many interpret this fast start as proof that more automatically means better. They increase the deficit, train harder, cut more calories, sleep less. But the body does not respond linearly. An excessive deficit raises stress hormones, cortisol increases, sleep quality declines, hunger hormones such as ghrelin rise. Instead of a calm metabolic adaptation, an alarm state emerges. And a body in alarm mode does not prioritize fat loss. It prioritizes safety. That is precisely why studies on sustainable weight loss repeatedly show that moderate deficits are more effective long-term than aggressive crash strategies. Visceral fat responds to a stable environment, not heroic extremes. Around day 4 or 5, the metabolic situation stabilizes, provided the deficit is consistent and not chaotic. Insulin spikes become less frequent, blood sugar fluctuations decrease, the body becomes more efficient at switching between glucose and fat burning. This state is often described as improved metabolic flexibility, a term that is gaining increasing importance in modern metabolic research. Metabolic flexibility means the body can switch between fuels depending on the situation, without major energy crashes, intense cravings, or extreme fatigue. Interestingly, many people report during this phase less intense hunger, more stable energy throughout the day, less bloating, a feeling of a lighter abdomen. These are not magical effects. They reflect hormonal stabilization. When insulin operates more under control and there is less constant glucose intake, the release of stored fatty acids is less inhibited, and visceral fat, due to its hormonal sensitivity, continues to respond to this new environment. Not visible like an advertisement, but biologically real.
On the 6th or 7th day, something subtle happens. Nothing spectacular, no dramatic transformation in the mirror, no suddenly visible six-pack. But at the cellular level, the situation has shifted. If the calorie deficit was moderate, not extreme, and sleep, protein intake, and movement have remained relatively stable, the body begins to adjust to a new energetic level. Insulin remains lower for extended periods than before. The liver produces fewer new fatty acids from excess glucose. Triglyceride levels may decrease. Fasting blood sugar stabilizes. In intervention studies using a moderate calorie deficit, improvements in metabolic markers appear within just a few days, especially in individuals who previously lived in a state of energy surplus. Not because 7 days are magical, but because the body reacts extremely quickly to changes in energy flow. And here lies the decisive point. Visceral fat is closely connected to these markers. It is in constant exchange with the liver. It influences inflammatory processes. It reacts sensitively to insulin signals. So when blood sugar, insulin, and triglycerides improve, the internal environment in which visceral fat exists usually changes as well. That does not mean dramatic amounts disappear within 7 days, but it does mean the trend can begin. And trends are biologically more powerful than single days. This is where a psychological misunderstanding often arises. People expect visual proof, but many of the first improvements are invisible. Studies on early weight loss repeatedly show metabolic improvements often occur before large visible fat losses become apparent. The liver responds quickly. Insulin sensitivity can improve within just a few days. Inflammatory markers begin to decline. The mirror, however, needs time. And that is exactly what leads many into frustration. They improve their internal health and quit because the external signal is not loud enough. But biologically, the opposite is true. When the markers improve, structure follows, not the other way around. What can sabotage this process? Even in a calorie deficit, there are factors that can blur the signal. 1. Constant insulin spikes. Continuous snacking, even in a calorie deficit, can prevent insulin from getting meaningful breaks. Insulin is not the enemy. It is a vital hormone.
but as long as it remains elevated, it blocks fat release. That does not mean frequent meals are automatically bad, but the quality and structure of meals determine whether the body gains access to stored energy. 2. Sleep deprivation and cortisol. A single poor night of sleep can measurably influence hunger and satiety hormones. Ghrelin increases, leptin decreases, impulse control declines. Chronically elevated cortisol can additionally increase water retention and subjectively create the feeling of being puffy. This can mask progress, even though metabolism is already adapting. Sleep is not a wellness detail. It is metabolic infrastructure.
3. Alcohol. Alcohol is prioritized in metabolism. As long as it is in the system, the body partially pauses other oxidation processes. In addition, poorer sleep quality, increased appetite, reduced decision-making capacity. 7 days are short, but alcohol can disproportionately influence this time frame. A. The sober truth about 7 days. In 7 days, no fat depot built over decades disappears, but something far more important can happen. The body can begin to shift the energetic environment. Less energy surplus, fewer insulin spikes, greater metabolic flexibility, a quiet but real trend toward reducing visceral fat mass. It is not a dramatic movie, it is biology. And biology does not work in explosions, it works in patterns. A. Conclusion. The right question after 7 days. Perhaps the better question after a week is not, how much did I lose? But, have I created an environment in which my body is ready to release visceral fat? If hunger is manageable, if energy becomes more stable, if the waist feels slightly freer, if bloating decreases, then those are signals, not proof, but signals. A. Practical mission. Choose a single factor for the next 7 days. Improve sleep quality, increase protein intake, reduce snacking, integrate strength training, pause alcohol. Not everything at once, just one lever. Observe what happens. The body sends signals long before the mirror applauds. This video does not replace medical advice. People with pre-existing conditions, eating disorders, pregnancy, or medication therapy should always discuss changes with a physician. But for many, progress does not begin with a diet. It begins with understanding. If this analysis was helpful, share in the comments which factor you will change first, and subscribe to the channel if you want to understand how your body truly works, beyond myths and quick promises.